On a cold, barren planet, Zara lay motionless in the wreckage of her spaceship. The crash had been violent. Her body ached all over, and her head throbbed with sharp pain. The ship, once gleaming with alien technology, now lay scattered across the rocky ground, torn apart by the crash. The planet was far from any known civilization, and Zara knew she was alone. She was far from home, far from her people, and far from safety, and she was running out of time. Zara was pregnant, and the pregnancy was not going well. Her people's physiology was different from humans, and carrying twins in such a harsh environment was dangerous. Every moment she stayed on the planet weakened her, and the crash had only made things worse. She could feel the life inside her slipping away with every breath she took. She was running out of hope. The sky above was dark, with only the distant stars for light. There were no sounds, just silence. But Zara wasn't sure how much longer she could stay awake. Her vision blurred, and the pain from her body and her growing belly consumed her. She began to close her eyes, surrendering to the blackness. Just when she thought all was lost, she heard something. A noise, a hum in the distance. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but then it grew louder. Zara's heart raced as she tried to stay awake. She forced her eyes open and saw something in the sky. A ship, flying low. It was human. Ethan could see the smoke rising from the wreckage and knew someone must have survived. He couldn't leave anyone behind. As part of a rescue mission, Ethan was trained to find survivors. He had been sent to this planet to investigate a signal, but this was not what he had expected. No one had warned him of a crash site, and certainly no one had told him there would be a pregnant alien woman lying in the wreckage. His ship hovered over the crash site, and he could see her lying on the ground below. A soft whimper escaped her lips. She was barely conscious, struggling to breathe. Ethan quickly gave orders to his team, telling them to prepare the medical bay. Then he climbed into a rescue pod and descended toward the surface. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced with questions. Who was she? Why was she here? And what kind of trouble was she in? As Ethan landed near the wreckage, he saw her clearly for the first time. She was beautiful, but her beauty was not what caught his attention. It was her desperation. She was clearly in pain, and if he didn't act fast, she might not make it. He rushed to her side, checking for injuries, but it was clear that the crash had done its damage. Her body was battered, but it was her pregnancy that worried him the most. Without thinking, Ethan gently picked her up, cradling her in his arms. She was light, but there was a strength in her that he hadn't expected. She looked up at him with wide eyes, her alien features glowing under the dim light of the ship's overhead lights. Her eyes were filled with fear, but there was something else too, something Ethan couldn't explain. As Ethan moved back to the pod, the woman's eyes fluttered shut. He couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for her. He didn't know who she was, or why she was stranded on this planet. But one thing was clear: she needed him. The pod lifted off the ground, taking them back to Ethan's ship. As they flew higher into the atmosphere, the silence between them was only broken by the faint hum of the engines. Ethan glanced down at the woman in his arms. Despite everything, there was something calm about her now. Maybe it was the relief of being rescued, or maybe it was just the exhaustion finally catching up to her. When they finally reached the ship, Ethan rushed her to the medical bay. His crew had already prepared everything, and the doctors went straight to work. Ethan stood off to the side, watching them, his mind still racing. Who was she? Why had she been stranded? And why was she pregnant with twins? There were so many questions, and he had no answers. The doctors worked quickly, scanning her with their advanced medical equipment. It didn't take long to discover that she was in grave danger. Her pregnancy was unstable, and the crash had made things worse. But there was hope. If they could get her stable, they might be able to save her and her children. Ethan stayed by her side, his eyes never leaving her. His heart felt heavy, like a weight pressing on him. He had seen many things in his career, but this was different. This wasn't just another rescue mission. This felt personal. He didn't know why, but as he looked down at the woman lying on the medical bed, he felt a strange connection to her. It was almost as if fate had brought them together. And in that moment, he made a silent promise to her. He would keep her safe, no matter what it took. The healing process. As the days passed, Zara remained unconscious, her body still weak from the crash and the dangerous pregnancy. The doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize her, but it was clear that she was not out of danger yet. Ethan stayed by her side, never leaving her alone. Every time he looked at her, he saw the pain in her face, and it made his heart ache. The ship's medical bay was quiet, except for the soft beeping of the monitors and the gentle hum of the ship's engines. Ethan sat by her bed, his eyes fixed on her. He had been through many dangerous situations in his career, but this felt different. This wasn't just about saving someone from danger. This was about protecting a life that depended on him now. Every day, the doctors worked to keep her stable. They gave her medicines to help with the pain, and they used advanced healing technology to speed up the process. Slowly, Zara began to show signs of improvement. Her breathing became steadier, and the color returned to her pale face. But she still hadn't woken up. Ethan didn't mind. He was just relieved that she was alive. As he sat there, staring at her, he couldn't help but think about how much he still didn't know about her. Who was she? Where did she come from? And why was she pregnant with twins? He had so many questions, but he didn't want to overwhelm her with them. Right now, his priority was to make sure she got better. One evening, as Ethan was reading a report, he noticed a slight movement from Zara. Her fingers twitched and her eyelids fluttered. He quickly stood up, his heart racing. She was waking up. "Zara?" he whispered softly, not wanting to startle her. Her eyes slowly opened, and she looked up at him, her gaze confused. For a moment, she didn't recognize him, and Ethan could see the fear in her eyes. But then, as her eyes focused, she seemed to relax slightly. She was still weak, but she was awake. "You're safe now," Ethan said gently, smiling down at her. Zara tried to speak, but her voice was barely a whisper. "Where am I?" "You're on my ship. You were hurt, but you're going to be fine," Ethan explained, trying to reassure her. "You're not alone anymore." Zara blinked, her mind trying to piece everything together. Her memories of the crash were blurry, but she remembered feeling terrified and alone. Now she was on a ship with a human who had saved her. She didn't know why he had helped her, but she was grateful. She couldn't understand it completely, but for some reason, she trusted him. "Thank you," Zara whispered, her voice weak. "You saved me." Ethan nodded, his smile softening. "I did what anyone would do. You're safe now, and I'm here to help." For the next few days, Zara rested as the ship's doctors continued to treat her. She was still weak, and the pregnancy needed to be monitored closely. Ethan stayed by her side, offering her food, water, and comfort. He knew that she was afraid, and he did everything he could to make her feel safe. One afternoon, as Ethan sat beside her, Zara looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. She had been listening to the quiet hum of the ship for days, but now she wanted to know more about the human who had saved her. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly, her eyes searching his face. Ethan paused, unsure how to explain. He had saved many people in his time, but there was something different about Zara. There was something about her that made him want to protect her, something he couldn't quite explain. "I don't know," Ethan said after a long moment. "I just couldn't leave you there. You were hurt, and you needed help. I've always been taught to help people in need, no matter who they are." Zara seemed to think about this for a moment, her eyes fixed on him. She had never met a human before, but she had heard stories about them. Some were good, and some were not. But Ethan was different. He had saved her, and now he was taking care of her, asking for nothing in return. As the days passed, Zara slowly regained her strength. She was still weak, But she could move her arms and legs now. The pain was less, and the doctors were optimistic about her recovery. She had not yet fully healed, but she was no longer in immediate danger. The twins inside her were stable, and for the first time since the crash, Zara allowed herself to relax. During her recovery, Ethan spent time talking to her. He told her about his life, about Earth, and about his role in the rescue mission. Zara listened quietly, her mind trying to understand this strange human who had come to her rescue. She had heard stories of humans, but they had never been kind in the tales told by her people. Yet Ethan was nothing like the humans in those stories. He was kind, brave, and selfless. She didn't understand it, but she was beginning to feel something for him, something she couldn't ignore. As the days went by, Zara started to trust Ethan more. She knew she had to rely on him if she wanted to survive. And she knew, deep down, that she was beginning to feel a bond with him, a bond she hadn't expected but couldn't deny. The twins' awakening. It had been several days since Zara had woken up, and every day she grew a little stronger. Her body was healing, but the pain was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. The doctors were pleased with her progress, but they had their eyes fixed on something far more important: Zara's pregnancy. The twins inside her were still a concern. The crash had caused stress on her body, and it was unknown how the babies would react to such an event. Zara could feel them moving inside her more now, tiny kicks that made her wince from time to time. Despite the discomfort, a part of her felt comforted by their presence, knowing that they were alive and fighting with her. Ethan had stayed by her side every moment he could. He knew that Zara needed support, not just medical help, but emotional comfort as well. She was still distant at times, but there was a quiet strength in her that he admired. He had never met anyone like her, and the more he spent time with her, the more he felt connected to her. It was strange, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were meant to cross paths. And now, her twins, her babies, were starting to make their presence known. That afternoon, Zara sat up in her bed, looking out the window of the ship at the distant stars. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, given everything that had happened. The ship was silent except for the soft hum of the engines. She felt a small flutter inside her, something moving, something that made her pause. The twins, they were awake. She placed her hand over her swollen belly, her eyes closing as she focused on the sensation. The babies were active now, kicking and shifting inside her. It was a strange feeling, like they were calling out to her, letting her know they were still with her. She had been so afraid during the crash, afraid that she had lost them, but now she knew they were strong. She wasn't alone. Ethan had been sitting by the door when he saw Zara's hand resting gently on her belly. He could see the small movements, the way her body shifted as the twins made themselves known. He stood and walked over to her side, standing quietly for a moment before speaking. "They're awake," Ethan said softly, his voice full of wonder. Zara opened her eyes and smiled weakly. "Yes, they are. They've been quiet for so long, but now I can feel them." Ethan nodded, looking down at her stomach with a soft expression. He had never really thought much about pregnancy before. It was something that happened to other people, not him. But now, seeing how much it meant to Zara, he realized how deeply important it was. These babies were a part of her, and they were a part of him too, in a way. "Are they okay?" Ethan asked cautiously, unsure if he should be asking about something so personal. Zara looked up at him, her eyes softening. "They're strong. They're fighters, just like their mother." She paused, a small sigh escaping her lips. "But the crash, it's been hard on my body. I don't know if I can carry them to term." Ethan took her hand gently in his, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You'll be fine. We'll make sure of it. You're not alone in this, Zara. I'll be here, and so will the doctors. We'll take care of you, all of you." For the first time, Zara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had come from a world of strength and independence, but this was different. She had never imagined that she would be in a situation like this, dependent on a stranger, a human, to save her and her children. Yet here she was, trusting him, relying on him, and somehow it felt right. She closed her eyes again, taking a deep breath. The twins were still moving, and the feeling gave her comfort. Zara hadn't allowed herself to truly relax since the crash, but now, with Ethan beside her, it was easier to imagine a future where the twins would be safe, a future where she would be safe. As the evening wore on, Zara felt a sudden, sharp pain in her abdomen. It was quick, but it was enough to make her gasp. She grabbed the side of the bed for support, trying to breathe through it. The twins' movements became more frantic, and Zara couldn't help but worry. She had been through pain before, but this was different. It felt more intense. Ethan immediately noticed the change in her. He rushed to her side, his eyes filled with concern. "What's happening? Are you okay?" I don't know," Zara whispered, her face pale. "The pain. It's getting worse." The ship's medical system immediately responded to the distress signal. Doctors were on their way, but Ethan could see the panic in Zara's eyes. She was terrified, not just for herself but for her babies. She had always known that carrying twins was risky, but now it felt like everything was spiraling out of control. As the medical team entered the room, Zara held her breath, hoping and praying that the twins would be okay. Ethan stayed close, his hand resting on her shoulder for comfort. He had no idea what was happening, but he would not let her go through this alone. The doctors worked quickly, scanning her and checking on the babies. After what felt like an eternity, the lead doctor finally looked up at Ethan and gave him a small nod. "They're all right for now," the doctor said, relief evident in their voice. "The babies are just a little excited. It's not unusual in cases like this, but we'll keep a close watch on her." Ethan let out a long breath he didn't realize he was holding. He looked down at Zara, who was still tense but had a faint smile on her face. She was relieved, but the journey wasn't over. The twins had awakened, but the real challenge was just beginning. The special connection. The days passed in a quiet, peaceful rhythm. Zara had started to settle into her recovery, but she couldn't stop thinking about the twins inside her. They had become a constant source of worry, but also of hope. Every kick, every movement, made her feel connected to them in a way she never thought possible. It was a bond, strong and unbreakable, that only a mother could understand. Ethan continued to stay by her side. He didn't ask many questions, but he was always there when she needed him. Whether it was bringing her food, helping her move around, or simply sitting with her in silence, Ethan never left her alone. He had taken on the role of protector, and Zara was beginning to trust him more with each passing day. She had never imagined that a human, someone so different from her, could have such a deep impact on her life. But as time went on, she found herself growing more and more attached to him. She didn't know if it was the stress of the situation or something else, but something about Ethan made her feel safe. His calm demeanor, his quiet strength, everything about him made her feel like she could breathe again. One evening, as the stars twinkled outside the ship, Zara sat by the window, her hand resting gently on her swollen belly. The twins were still active, kicking and shifting inside her. She smiled softly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She was amazed at how much love she could already feel for them, even though they weren't born yet. Ethan entered the room quietly, not wanting to disturb her. He had gotten used to these moments of silence with her, where neither of them spoke, but they understood each other. He saw her sitting there, her eyes distant, but there was a softness in her expression that he had never seen before. "How are they?" Ethan asked, his voice gentle. Zara turned to him, her eyes meeting his. There was something in her gaze now, something that wasn't there when they first met. It was trust, a quiet understanding between them that hadn't been there before. She hadn't fully realized it, but she had come to rely on him more than she had expected. "They're strong," she replied softly. "They move a lot now." I can feel them. They're going to be okay." Ethan smiled and walked over to sit next to her. He looked down at her belly, watching the faint movements of the twins. "I'm glad to hear that." Zara turned her gaze back to the stars, her thoughts drifting. "I've never been this far from home before. I've always been with my people. We've never really trusted humans. But I feel different now." Ethan watched her closely, sensing the vulnerability in her words. "Things are different now," he said quietly. "You're not alone. I'm here, and I'll protect you and the twins for as long as I can." Those words, simple as they were, meant more to Zara than anything else. She had always been independent, strong in her own right. But now she was learning to let go, to allow someone else in. Ethan had saved her life, and he was showing her that it was okay to depend on him. For the first time since the crash, she felt truly safe. For the next few days, Zara found herself thinking more about Ethan. She had always believed that strength came from within, that a person had to rely on themselves to survive. But now she was beginning to understand something new. Strength wasn't just about fighting alone. It was about trusting others, sharing the burden. As the twins inside her grew stronger, so did her feelings for Ethan. It was strange and unexpected. She had never imagined that a human could make her feel the way she did, but there was no denying it. She cared for him deeply. One morning, Zara woke up feeling a little different. The twins were more active than usual, and there was a strange sense of anticipation in the air. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the little kicks, and for the first time, she wondered if the twins knew her emotions. Could they sense what she was feeling? She didn't have long to think about it before Ethan walked in with a tray of food. He smiled at her as he set the tray down on the table beside her. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his voice soft. Zara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. I'm starting to feel something. A connection, not just with the twins, but with you." Ethan froze, unsure of how to respond. He had felt the same way, but he didn't want to rush anything. He didn't want to make her feel pressured. But as he looked at her, he realized that he didn't need to say anything. She already knew. "I don't know why," Zara continued, her voice shaky, "but I feel like we're connected somehow. Like you're a part of this now. Like you're a part of me." Ethan smiled gently and sat down beside her. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. "Maybe we are. Maybe we always were." There was silence between them, but it was a comfortable one. Zara had never felt this kind of peace before. She had always believed that survival was something that had to be done alone, but now she knew that wasn't true. She didn't need to do everything by herself. She had Ethan, and he had her. As the twins inside her continued to grow, so did the bond between them. They were more than just two separate lives. They were a family, and Zara had never felt more certain of that. The enemy attacks. The ship hummed softly as it moved through the vast emptiness of space. Zara had grown used to the quiet now, to the stillness that had become her new reality. She spent her days resting and talking to Ethan, getting to know him better as they both waited for the situation to improve. The twins had been active, but she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She was still worried about her health, but more than that, she worried about the babies. The feeling of safety she had begun to find on the ship was beginning to feel fragile. It was hard to shake the feeling that they were too far from home, too vulnerable out here in the unknown. Still, Ethan did everything he could to make her feel at ease. But no one could have predicted what was coming. It started with a sudden jolt. The lights on the ship flickered, and the low hum of the engines cut off abruptly. The ship lurched, throwing Zara off balance. She gripped the side of her bed, heart pounding. Her eyes were wide with alarm as she struggled to steady herself. "Ethan," she called, panic creeping into her voice. In seconds, Ethan was at her side, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. "What's happening?" he asked, helping her sit up and steadying her. "I don't know," Zara replied, trying to catch her breath. But something's wrong. Just as she finished speaking, the ship rocked again. This time, it was much harder. The whole room seemed to tremble, and the sound of alarms blared through the corridors. Enemy ships. A voice suddenly crackled over the intercom. "We're under attack." Ethan's face went pale. He had known that there were dangers in this part of space, but he never expected them to come this soon. "Stay here," he told Zara firmly, but Zara shook her head. "No, I'm not staying here. I can't just hide while you fight." She was still weak, but the fire in her eyes was strong. She couldn't let Ethan face whatever was coming alone. She needed to know what was happening, and she wanted to be there. "I can't let you do that, Zara," Ethan said, his voice tight with concern. "You're pregnant. You need to stay here and be safe." But before Zara could argue further, the ship jolted again, harder this time. The lights went out completely, leaving them in darkness. The panic in the air was thick, and the sound of distant explosions echoed through the metal walls. Ethan didn't wait any longer. He grabbed Zara's hand and helped her up, his expression determined. "We're going to the bridge. Stay close to me." They made their way quickly through the darkened halls, the ship shaking with each impact. Zara could hear the sounds of battle, distant shots fired, the whirring of weapons, and the shouting of the crew as they fought to defend the ship. As they reached the main hallway leading to the bridge, Zara could hear voices. She saw Ethan look at her and then signal for her to stay quiet. "They're here," he muttered under his breath, a grim look on his face. Zara followed Ethan as they ducked behind a corner. She tried to steady her breath, her heart racing. She could feel the twins inside her, reacting to the chaos. The kicks were harder now, and it almost felt like they were just as frightened as she was. Ethan peeked around the corner and quickly signaled for her to follow him. They moved swiftly down the corridor, keeping low and staying out of sight. The sound of fighting was getting louder, and Zara could see soldiers running past them, weapons in hand, ready to face the attackers. "Stay close," Ethan whispered, pulling Zara behind a large panel as a group of enemy soldiers rushed past. Zara felt the tension rise in her chest as the sounds of the battle grew louder. Her mind raced, thinking of what could be happening to Ethan's crew. Zara had seen battles before. Her people were no strangers to conflict. But this felt different. This was human technology, human warfare, and she didn't know what to expect. The sounds of the fight grew louder, and soon they were at the entrance to the bridge. Ethan quickly glanced at Zara before pushing the door open. The room was chaos, with crew members working frantically to keep the ship moving and defend it at the same time. "We need to get to the control panel," one of the crew members shouted. "They're breaking through." Ethan pushed his way through the crowd of soldiers and crew members, dragging Zara behind him. The room was filled with flashing red lights, and Zara felt a cold rush of fear. They were under attack, and this time they might not make it out. Suddenly, a loud bang shook the ship, and the room was plunged into darkness once again. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the lights flickered back on, and Zara saw something she had not expected. A soldier, dressed in full armor, standing at the entrance. His helmet was lifted, and Zara recognized him immediately. The enemy. It was a figure she had seen in her nightmares, tall, strong, and with eyes that seemed to burn through her soul. The leader of the attackers. "Zara," the soldier said in a cold voice. "We meet at last." The word sent a chill down her spine. She had been hiding for so long, running from enemies who sought to destroy her people. Now it seemed that the past had finally caught up with her. Ethan stepped in front of Zara, his body tense, his hand going for his weapon. "Get out of the way," he warned the soldier. "We won't let you take her." But the soldier only smirked. "You think you can protect her? She belongs to us now." As the battle raged around them, Zara felt the fear rising in her chest. She could sense the danger closing in, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for the fight that was coming. The growing bond. The bridge was a mess. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of gunfire echoed down the hall. Yet, amid the chaos, Ethan stood firm, his eyes locked on Zara, his face a mask of determination. "Stay close to me," he whispered urgently as he pulled her toward a nearby emergency exit. The sound of approaching enemy soldiers made his pulse quicken, but he didn't let his fear show. He couldn't. Not now. Zara gripped his arm tightly as they hurried down the narrow corridor. Her heart raced not from fear for herself, but for the safety of her unborn children. The twins inside her were kicking hard, as though they knew the danger they were in. "I can't lose them," Zara thought, her breath coming fast. "You're going to be fine," Ethan reassured her, glancing over his shoulder. His tone was calm, but his eyes betrayed the stress he was under. His instincts told him to protect Zara at all costs, and nothing was more important than getting her to safety. The ship rocked again, and a blast of cold air swept through the corridor. It was clear the enemy was gaining on them, but Ethan wasn't ready to give up. He pushed forward, leading Zara toward the crew quarters, where they could hide and regroup. The fact that she was carrying twins made her even more vulnerable. He couldn't let anything happen to her. They reached a small, secure room and slipped inside. Ethan quickly sealed the door and activated the security systems. The room was dimly lit, but it offered a moment of safety. For the first time since the attack began, Ethan allowed himself a breath. But Zara was still visibly shaking. "They're so close," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her pale face reflected the fear she felt for the twins. Ethan knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. "We're safe for now, but I won't leave you. I swear it." He could see how much she was struggling to stay strong. It wasn't just the physical pain of carrying the twins. It was the emotional toll of being on the run. She was an alien princess, someone who had been thrust into a dangerous situation not of her making. She had lost everything she knew. Ethan didn't know if he could fully understand her pain, but he did know one thing. She was not alone anymore. "You don't have to do this alone, Zara," Ethan said softly, his voice full of sincerity. "I'm here. I'll help you protect them." Her blue eyes met his, wide with surprise. In them, Ethan saw something that took him off guard. Trust. She was starting to trust him. That trust, that connection, made his heart beat faster. He had only known her for a short time, but their bond was growing stronger with each passing moment. Zara took a shaky breath, feeling the warmth of Ethan's hand in hers. I never thought I could trust a human," she whispered. "But you're different. You saved me." The words warmed Ethan's heart, but he didn't have time to linger on them. They were in danger. He could hear the distant sounds of enemies approaching, the pounding of footsteps in the hallway outside the room. "We need to move quickly," Ethan said, standing up and helping Zara to her feet. "I'm going to get us off this ship. If we can reach the escape pods, we can leave and find a safer place." Zara nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. She couldn't sit back and wait for help. She had to do something. As they prepared to leave the room, Zara paused for a moment. She placed her hand over her belly, feeling the tiny movements of the twins inside her. Ethan watched her, a quiet understanding passing between them. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice small. "I can't protect them alone." "You're not alone," Ethan replied, squeezing her hand. "I won't let anything happen to you or your children. I promise." And Zara believed him. She had seen the strength in him, the way he fought for those he cared about. She saw it in the way he held her hand, the way he kept her close even in the face of danger. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a protector. They moved quickly through the hallways, Ethan guiding Zara through the ship's twisting corridors. As they passed soldiers running to battle stations and crew members working frantically to repair the ship, Zara couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for Ethan's presence. They reached an airlock that led to the escape pods. Ethan quickly accessed the control panel, and with a soft beep, the door slid open. The small escape pod waiting inside was their only chance of survival now. Ethan helped Zara inside, securing her safely in the seat. He looked at her one last time, giving her a reassuring smile. "We're getting out of here. Just stay with me." As the escape pod detached from the ship and rocketed into the unknown, Zara's fear began to ease slightly. The twins were still kicking, but Ethan's presence comforted her. They weren't out of danger yet, but with him by her side, she knew they had a chance. The bond between them was growing stronger every moment. It was no longer just about survival. It was about something deeper, something more meaningful. Zara wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. Ethan was the only one she could rely on now. As the stars streaked past the pod's windows, Zara whispered softly, "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." Ethan didn't reply at first. He simply turned to face her, his eyes filled with determination. "We're just getting started," he said quietly. "We'll get through this together." The final battle and a new future. The escape pod drifted through the dark void of space, far away from the chaos of the enemy ship. Inside, Zara and Ethan sat in tense silence. The threat wasn't over yet. The escape was only the beginning. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, and Ethan knew that their fight was far from done. Zara sat beside him, her eyes focused on the stars outside. The twins inside her were calm now, but the worry never fully left her. She had survived so much, but this battle was unlike anything she had faced before. The safety of her children and the future of her people was at stake. "We're almost at the hidden base," Ethan said, breaking the silence. He had been scanning the controls, ensuring they were on the right course. "We'll be safe there for a while." Zara nodded, but she didn't feel the comfort she had hoped for. She wanted to believe everything would be okay, but the reality was hard to ignore. The enemy would eventually come after them. They had to be ready. Suddenly, a red alert blared. The pod's screen flickered, and an image of the enemy fleet appeared. They had tracked them down. Ethan's heart raced. The escape pod was too small to outrun the enemy ships. They were trapped. "They found us," Ethan muttered under his breath, fingers flying across the controls. "We won't make it to the base at this rate. We'll have to fight." Zara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She didn't want Ethan to risk his life for her and the twins, but she knew he wouldn't back down. "We can't let them take us. We won't survive that." With no time to waste, Ethan powered up the pod's defense systems. It was a small craft, but it had enough weapons to put up a fight. He strapped himself into the pilot's seat, determination in his eyes. He had promised to protect Zara and her children, and he would keep that promise, no matter the cost. The enemy ships closed in, their weapons locking onto the escape pod. A warning beeped as a blast shot toward them. Ethan swerved the pod, narrowly avoiding the attack. The ship shook from the near miss, but he didn't flinch. He kept his focus. "We can do this," Ethan muttered, his voice steady despite the situation. Zara gripped the seat, her eyes wide as the pod jolted again. She had seen Ethan fight, but this was different. They were outnumbered, and their enemies were relentless. Without hesitation, Ethan activated the pod's weapon systems. Laser blasts fired from the pod's cannons, hitting one of the enemy ships. The explosion was small but enough to cause the enemy to hesitate for a moment. Zara felt her heart beat faster as she saw Ethan's skills in action. He was doing everything he could to protect them. "You're doing great," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "Keep going." But Ethan knew this wouldn't be enough. They couldn't keep dodging and shooting forever. The enemy ships were closing in again, and time was running out. He made a decision. "Hang on," he shouted. He turned the pod sharply, making a beeline for a nearby asteroid field. The rocks were massive, and navigating them would be difficult, but it was their only chance. The enemy would have to slow down to follow. The pod raced into the asteroid field, weaving between the massive rocks. The ship rocked as asteroids slammed into its hull, but Ethan kept control. He knew this was their best chance to escape. Behind them, the enemy ships followed, but they were slower now, careful not to crash into the asteroids. Ethan's heart pounded as he maneuvered the pod through the maze of rocks. One wrong move, and they would be trapped. Zara held her breath, eyes glued to the view ahead. Her mind was focused on the twins, still safe within her, but the fear for them was real. They had to survive. They had to. Then, just as the enemy ships seemed ready to catch up, Ethan made a bold move. He slammed the pod into a steep dive, taking them into a narrow passage between two asteroids. The enemy ships were too large to follow closely. Ethan pushed the pod to its limits, shooting forward at a breakneck speed. The enemy ships struggled to keep up, their lasers firing wildly. One of the blasts grazed the side of the pod, but Ethan didn't stop. He was getting closer to the hidden base. It was just ahead, if they could make it. Finally, they broke free of the asteroid field. The enemy ships were far behind now, unable to follow through the maze of rocks. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief, but he didn't stop. He pushed the pod toward the base, his eyes focused ahead. Zara let out a shaky breath. "We made it. We're going to be okay." As the base's hangar doors opened to receive them, Ethan brought the pod in for a smooth landing. They had escaped, but the battle wasn't over. The enemy would be back. They needed to regroup, plan, and prepare for what was to come. But for now, Zara knew they were safe. She turned to Ethan, her heart full of gratitude. "You did it," she said softly. "You kept us safe." Ethan smiled, though his expression was weary. "We're not done yet, but we'll face whatever comes next together." The bond between them had grown stronger, deeper. Zara knew she could trust him with her life and the lives of her children. Whatever challenges the future held, they would face them side by side. As they exited the pod, Zara felt a glimmer of hope. There was a new future ahead of them, one full of uncertainty, but also of possibility. And as long as Ethan was by her side, she knew they could overcome anything. The battle wasn't over, but Zara knew one thing for sure. They would fight, together, and together they would win.